Hi, friends. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Clouds Edge to Edge Transformation. And as we've said before, this transformation is literally global. It's not just in the tech industry, but even nonprofits, even different sectors of society are shifting as we speak. And here with us today is Ganesh Mani. Ganesh and I went to college together when we were literally teenagers. And both of us have grown up a little bit over the years. And he's done amazing things, including supporting entrepreneurs and young minds. Ganesh, tell us about you. How did you become the Ganesh Mani we know today?
Thank you, Shankar. It's an honor to be here. I haven't grown up yet. I'm probably still a student of many things, but it's fun to be a student. So, long story short, did computer science at IIT Mumbai, great education. In fact, starting out with Hollerith Code and Cardin. Those were the days of IBM 360. There are many stories around that. We've come a long way. I primarily work at the intersection of business and AI these days. It's been a wonderful journey, and happy to chat more about it. It's been a great ride all around. What a wonderful time to be alive.
Indeed, when you and I were on campus, we were like the super geeks, all about mathematics and logic. How did you end up becoming the bridge between technology and business?
Yeah, good question. So I was always a contrarian. Maybe I wasn't brave enough to remain in India and do a startup or battle the bureaucracy. Right now, a lot of the youngsters coming out of the top colleges in India are doing wonderful things, innovating in India. And that's what I tell my CMU or other top university colleagues, that you're not getting now the best and the brightest. Not that we were, but we were, I would say, at least I was sort of an economic immigrant. I was sort of not brave enough to face the bureaucracy, the friction, all the noise and dust, if you will, in India. But when I came to Wisconsin for graduate studies, everybody was doing systems, networking. In fact, we had visitors in Professor Landweber's lab. One day I met somebody from Africa, and I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Oh, we're trying to get the whole continent connected and all that." This was now late 80s. And at that point, there was Whisk VM, the Wisconsin virtual machine, that was carrying 40% of the ARPANET traffic between the East Coast and the West Coast. Professors used to say, don't kick that server or whatever, you're going to cut off a bulk of the academic email. And then we know what happened in the 90s. Everything blossomed. So fun times, but ended up in AI by being a contrarian. Worked with some very simple neural net models. My advisor, Professor Len Yor, we just did a workshop in his memory back in medicine this past October. Len had two papers in the first CHI, the premier international conference. He had training in psychology as well as computer science, and built some of the original pyramid architectures, multi-layer networks. Maybe didn't work out some of the math and the advanced transformer related models, but some of those ideas modeled after the human visual system, human cognitive system, still lays the foundation of many modern AI systems. So after that, did a fintech startup. It wasn't called Fintech. Found that a good home at State Street Global. I've been doing a few other things. Last couple of decades, I've been in Pittsburgh, involved with the Thai chapter, involved with CMU, involved with some startups, and so on.
I see the beautiful CMU buildings in the background. What brought you to Pittsburgh and CMU?
We had just had our first exit. We also had our first entry into our family. My wife and I had a toddler then. And my wife was still finishing up her PhD. We met at an AI conference. She does bioinformatics, quant life sciences. Also, she was doing some wonderful things at the University of Pittsburgh. They have a school of medicine and a very good computer science department and intelligence systems program. She was a student and then now is a tenured faculty member in the School of Medicine. Other than the Bay Area, Pittsburgh has a thriving Indian American community and the draw of the two top universities, CMU and Pittsburgh. The startup ecosystem is vibrant, but I'd say the investor ecosystem isn't that vibrant. A lot of the startups here have to take a sinusoidal path. Some of them have moved to Boston. Some of them have moved elsewhere. I've been involved with the startup ecosystem, been doing some consulting. I was an adjunct at CMU, but last couple of years I've been doing more both teaching and research as an adjunct with the School of Computer Science, doing more with the Tepper School, which is business school, especially around their MSBA, Master of Science in Business Analytics, a lot of project-based stuff. I also have done some work with CMU Africa about diversified portfolio of things that I'm involved in.
You have been involved in many initiatives supporting entrepreneurs, supporting students. You've also done a Fintech startup and many other initiatives. Which part of the journey would you say was the most interesting or the most challenging for you?
Both interesting and challenging is sort of this early stage innovation. We were very early with fintech using neural nets and other nonlinear techniques for investment management. In fact, the first version of the Advanced Research Center we created at State Street Global, then one of the largest asset management firms in the world, the portfolio managers that we were servicing were skeptical. We also had a little boutique on the side, which was sort of eating our own cooking, but the traction was a little light in terms of impact because people didn't believe that augmented intelligence was real, that these systems could help the human portfolio manager. So sometimes being early is challenging. At the same time, one of my colleagues, his wife, had created image registration software for the human breast. So that turned into a second reader for mammograms. One of the first FDA-approved AI systems was called computer-aided diagnosis. They didn't want to use the AI moniker. This is in the 90s. So we've come a long way. Even now, there are a number of efforts around early stage innovation. I'm working a little bit with somebody not far from you, I think Pismo Beach, maybe an hour and a half south of you, Louis Rosenberg, who is an innovator many times over. He was early with AR, VR, has literally hundreds of patents, but now is working on collective intelligence, conversational intelligence using the swarm modeling concept. So we've done some interesting things together. For instance, if you have a set of 300 people, town hall, you want them to debate about either something political or something business related or any decision you want to make, it can get a little raucous putting 300 people in the same room. Now, if you create either 30 rooms of 10 people each or 30 rooms, and then have a large language model observe each room and transmit information. So you can say in the other room now, people are talking about impact. People are talking about having a gender balanced team. Things like that may be a dimension that you're not looking at. So combination of collective intelligence and a large language models. So using AI in a very indirect way in the service of helping humans reach decisions quicker, better decisions, making sure all the dimensions are covered and so on. So that's some recent work, which is exciting. So that I would say again is early innovation as a company that's trying to commercialize it. So he's also finding there's that proselytizing education that needs to happen first before people use these paradigms. But the future definitely is multi-human, multi-machine. So we need to learn how to team with other humans, other machines, and see how we can do these things in the service of humanity.
Ganesh, you worked in so many different phases of AI. You were there during the early days of AI when ARPANET and everything was powered. Neural networks were just a concept in the 60s to the 80s to the 2000s. We've always had these AI summers and AI winters. What is it that causes this busts and booms in the AI cycle? And right now we are going through one of those big hype cycles. What can we do to even it out? And what is the cause of all this?
What we have figured out now is hardware is important. Large amounts of data can be important for many applications, and human machine teaming and continuous innovation. There are new models yet to be discovered that'll get us to the next stage. There are a couple of things where we are stuck. Now, hardware is important. Let's go back to the mid 90s. So out here in my backyard, the IBM Deep Thought group, a bunch of graduate students who primarily worked on the algorithms. And that's what, if you go back to the mid 50s, 1956, when McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, et cetera, created that .NET conference, they said, hey, we're smart people. We can come up with some interesting algorithms. We'll solve the vision problem this summer or next summer. And then they thought, in a few semesters, they can solve all the problems. They thought mental models, algorithms, or clever algorithms are sufficient. It turns out it's not. So even deep thought, which did very well, eventually had to get that hardware boost, right? It became Deep Blue at IBM. So that final push came from hardware to beat the world champion human chess. So you need a combination of hardware and software. I don't have to tell you this. You come from the semiconductor world. So just look at the price chart of NVIDIA, right? That tells you hardware is important. Now, looking in the rear view mirror, it seems obvious. Likewise, for many perceptual applications, having lots of data and then using the attention mechanism or using transformers, throw all the data rather than do feature engineering and so on, works magic for many things, including what we are seeing with these large language models, Gen AI chatbots. So there is a glimmer of hope in that whole realm. But let's then look at two areas where we are stuck, or maybe techno-social, but we're still stuck. One is self-driving. So we have .org right here in my backyard again. And I knew a senior executive there who recently quit. They are the ones who define the levels 1 through 5. So level 5 full automation where there's no pedal, no steering wheel. You just get in a shuttle or a car and it just magically takes you wherever you want to go. We're stuck closer to level 3, and that's been the case for a while, in spite of all the prognostications by the Elon Musks of the world. We haven't moved a level in the last few years. But an easy solution, maybe this will happen in Singapore or it'll happen in Phoenix or one of the larger spread out grid cities where you don't mix human and self-driving cars, only self-driving cars that only take right turns. The left turn tends to be a little tricky here in the US. You could do that now. Maybe so we'll need to reimagine some things and then you could get up to level 4 and 5. That's one way to make progress. The other use case, maybe in the overseas geos, it's working a little better. It's the self-checkout. So self-checkout is something we thought would make your and my life easier and would also redeploy the grocery store staff to maybe chat with you and I while we're doing the self-checkout because relationships matter, or maybe to rearrange some of the things in the shelves and so on. But that hasn't happened. I'm frustrated because it hasn't become a habit. We were talking about habits earlier before we started the recording. So each time I go to self-checkout, and the Walmart one is a little different from another, say, Amazon's technology. So the principle of least astonishment doesn't quite work. There are some barriers, and that is a lesson for the technologists as well. And we haven't, we talked about healthcare a little bit, there has been progress in terms of second readers, computer assisted technologies, primarily in radiology and cardiology. But then look at the overall spending pie. We are somewhere near 20% of the US GDP being used in health. Outcomes are not significantly better than, say, Switzerland or even some emerging economies. I'd say some parts of Singapore and maybe the top hospitals in India. We're not getting that bang for the buck in healthcare. Those are all cautionary tales. We're talking about diagnostics and debugging your mouse. Causality is still important. Some of these large language models sort of struggle with it. And around COVID, there were a lot of small data episodes. There was that restaurant transmission in China that was more anecdotal. People read it. And then there was a choir in Seattle that had turned out to be a super spreader event, but those for knowledgeable people, even for people like you and I know you're more of a healthcare person than I am, sort of established that transmission through the air. You didn't need a lot of data. You just need to think through how diseases are transmitted. So sometimes one or two case-based examples, and this goes back to how humans learn. Many parts of Africa, many parts of Asia, still little kids are learning from their mothers or grandmothers in the oral tradition via tales, right? They're being told stories, they're being told anecdotes, and there's a lot of learning. There are some things that a current 5-year-old can do in rural Africa or in rural Asia that the best language models, that the best robots would struggle with. So a lot of it is just transmitting information using this oral tradition. And then there is this whole argument about, do we want a bird or do we want an airplane? That debate's going on in AI. Do you want something highly engineered that can do a certain task, or are you trying to anthropomorphize and build something close to a human? And I say tongue in cheek, partly two humans can get together and we can create a replica in 9 months, right? So we don't need more replicas. We need complements. We need the best complement, and that's personalized. I may be good at something. You and I, we're good with numbers. My numeric skills, maybe quant skills, are getting a little rusty. I used to do a lot more Greek. I don't do as much Greek these days in the business school. So my complement that I can use would be very different from, say, maybe a liberal arts major or somebody who has a very different surgeon who's very skilled with their hands. So in the operating room, they may need different kind of assistance, maybe some cameras along with some large language models that sort of observing what he or she is doing and saying, hey, you want to pay attention to this. This patient has a slightly idiosyncratic anatomy, or remember they have these pre-existing conditions. So you need to be extra careful or take this extra step or whatever it might be. Finding the right complement could be very interesting. That's, I think, an open challenge in AI.
You use the term augmented intelligence multiple times. So, can you shed some light on that? There was a belief that you won't need humans, everything can be done by machines. But now people are clearer that we need augmenting of intelligence skills, things that cannot be replicated with machines, such as oral traditions or nonverbal skills. So, can you shed light on that a little more?
To paraphrase the famous saying, it should be of the people, for the people, by the people. So you want to make sure that we're doing these things in the service of humans. So augmentation is exactly what we talked about earlier. How do you find the right complement? So you may have, like in a boardroom setting right now, people are making all sorts of decisions in the education realm. So you want the machines to be really complementing this human group strengths. So can you get a couple of robots to sit in the boardroom, or if it is on an assembly line inside a manufacturing plant, can they demonstrate certain best practices to humans to complement what the other maybe junior robots or whatever would be doing, and so on. Robots bring precision, they may reinforce certain order of doing things, they may know by experience exactly how many minutes the panel should be dipped into the humans may be using. The other day I read a little recipe for poaching eggs. I've never poached eggs before using vinegar and so on. So following a recipe helped me. My daughter was amused and amazed that my first poached egg turned out pretty, but I wouldn't have known the recipe unless I read it, and it was pretty easy to do. So this goes back to teaching a human how to. So there are some things that robots can maybe experiment. So CMU has this now cloud lab now where folks, including undergrads, can do experiments from the comfort of their dorm, but they are sort of mixing reagents or doing some things. And there are some things that reagents are expensive. Sometimes they can literally blow up, right? If you mix two things that have an explosive reaction and so on. So those are things AI or the large language model or this robot can warn the student about. And maybe if it's some small quantities, the robot might say, let the student learn. I know this is going to blow up, but they need to sort of observe that. But if it's larger quantities, it may flash a warning and so on. There are many things now that can be done with this human machine teaming. There are many things that can be done remotely. We haven't talked about risk control, providing the risk control either from the machine side or from the human side for the folks who are worried about AI may take over everything. Humans still bring the data, bring the domain knowledge with the machines now, bring the algorithms. So we still have significant control, if not complete control. So we just need to set the right risk control mechanisms. In the financial markets, we used to say traders or portfolio managers, they need to do their own thing. They need to be given their freedom. And then the risk control, the risk manager is a separate function, may even be reporting to a different boss, so can provide the right check and balance on the trader or the portfolio manager. So that paradigm can be replicated in the human machine teaming world as well. Some subgroup is responsible for this risk management.
You brought up some very interesting points about the globalization of technology. CMU has a thriving campus here in Silicon Valley as well. And I've seen campuses in New York and other areas. Please tell us about what's happening in Africa and how is that bringing new dimensions to what you're doing?
Yeah, so the two global campuses I've visited and have collaborated with are the Doha campus in Qatar, which is all undergrad. And then there is the graduate campus in Rwanda, which has been there now for over 10 years. So they award MSIT, MSAI, so masters in engineering overlapping with IT and AI. And it's really set up with the whole knowledge transfer, skills transfer, and skills transfer tends to be a little different from knowledge transfer. That's a finer point. We talked about recipes. It's like getting your grandma's recipe, you cooking it, and saying, oh, why doesn't it quite taste the same? Because the skill and some of that attention that goes into implementing the digital recipe or just the method is also important. It's funded by the MasterCard Foundation, government of Rwanda, and now the Gates Foundation is funding some things. Really, can you, through entrepreneurship, through creating new engineers, can you create decent jobs in the continent? And on the research side, CMU Africa has created this AfriTech network. And the goal is for a top-notch research university like Carnegie Mellon to also provide some advice, collaborate with other universities. So we're doing a financial inclusion project, for instance, with WITS University. So they already have a great Fintech group at WITS, but as we collaborate, we are learning from each other and also infusing some best practices on both sides. So they're telling us a little bit about the culture there, the lack of data in certain geographies, or the data can be a little different in South Africa, so a little more developed than some of the other countries in Africa, but the data quality varies. If you're looking at financial inclusion, financial literacy, also with respect to, I think one of the tasks is bankruptcy prediction. So companies in different geographies within Africa have different drivers, and then also the data tends to be a little different. So we're looking at all of that and collaborating. CMU is one of the few Western universities that has a campus, is on the ground, and has been there now for over a decade. If you look at population centers, now China is 1 billion people, India is 1 billion people, and Africa is the other continent with about 1 billion people. So these three geographies are going to move the needle for the rest of the world. So it's going to be very interesting to see what a set of frontier markets in Africa and what some of that innovation along with local data, local knowledge tends to be important. So you can take the algorithms that are being developed all over the world. We are talking about this digital public infrastructure, DPI, being even more important than just the AI large language model phenomenon. So within AI, what Hugging Face is doing, the open source models, they are part of the digital public infrastructure. but we've had Wikipedia, we've had GitHub. Around COVID, we had protocols that some of the top hospital chains on the East Coast or West Coast, right? By trial and error figured it out, and then they transmitted that to the rest of the world, saying these are sort of best practices for treating COVID patients. And if those were open sourced, and some of those things become part of this digital public infrastructure, and since it's digital, we don't have the issue of the tragedy of the commons, right? It can be shared without hampering the resource and so on. So some very interesting things happening around that AI world, which folks like Gates Foundation are pushing in a big way.
That is amazing that you have been able to bring this knowledge and collaborate with different parts of the world. Now, speaking of collaboration with the world, even today, a lot of startups still scale up in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco Bay Area. But we know that that's not enough. Now that you've been working in the Pittsburgh area, what is it that will be needed to bring this kind of entrepreneurial culture and scale up culture to other parts of the world so that we can use the talents from different parts of the world?
That's a good question. We're still sort of figuring this out. There are clusters of innovation. There was the Spartak Academy in Moscow that developed women's tennis players. There was Zola Bud and her village and so on, or ecosystem that developed runners. So likewise, Silicon Valley obviously is sort of the poster child, but we have now similar clusters in Israel and Bangalore, Shanghai, and other parts of China. So that cluster effect and being co-located is important. It's becoming less important. You and I are having this conversation, but we have met, we have a common connection by way of our background. So maybe bringing that to bear. So maybe folks can still work remotely. And a lot of these startups are now trying that. Now you have this immersion. In fact, for some of my part-time MSBA students who are normally all over the world, they're coming in this weekend. We're calling that immersion weekend. So if you can mix the immersion with where the brainstorming, where the one-on-one mentoring can take place over a dinner or over a private meeting where you may not want to put those things in an email or even in a recorded message, but you, Jane, may take a junior person on the side and say, look, you're brilliant, but you're doing all these things that are creating angst for your teammates. So some of that mentoring in a very comfortable setting can take place physically in real life as opposed to virtually. So finding that right balance and creating a facile, Pittsburgh didn't have that many nonstop flights to the valley. It still has only one or two a day. So air connectivity, ease of access. In the US, I know other people have mentioned this, having high speed even for you guys, if you can get to Southern California. Likewise, if I can get to DC, New York, etc., China, Spain, some other countries. India is now looking at improving its infrastructure. So getting that physical infrastructure, getting that physical connectivity right to facilitate, and depends on the stage of the company. So initially, maybe people are together in Silicon Valley, and then investors didn't, in the old days, didn't want to travel, but maybe COVID changed everything. Folks are now investing remotely much more facilely and so on. So it's still a work in progress. Getting that sort of combination right is going to be important.
In fact, it's considered desirable now for a Silicon Valley company to have branches around the world to tap into local talents. Now, you have worked in so many different things, Ganesh, and I still see you working early in the mornings, late in the evenings. What keeps you up? What is it that excites you the most at this stage in your life?
One of my dorm mates, he calls it figuring out how the world works. So now how the world works is changing. There are some things humans are driven by fear and greed. So there's the whole behavioral science aspect, which we're still trying to understand. So some human behaviors haven't changed, but machine behaviors are changing rapidly. We need to now mix the two, and then we're causing damage not only to climate, but indulging in either petty conflict in our backyard, in our institutions, or the larger conflicts. There are three major wars going on, one in Sudan and so on that nobody talks about. The other two, everybody knows. We should be bringing technology, we should be bringing thought leadership, we should be bringing all the investor resources to bear on some of those larger problems in the interest of sustainability, in the interest of long-term returns, because destroying a part of the world and rebuilding it, waiting for climate change to happen and then ameliorating it is sort of foolish. At the end of the day, a stitch in time saves nine. And more global cooperation, easier said than done. We were lucky to have grown up into democracies. So democracies have a role, but democracies also, like mangoes and apples, come in many flavors. So we have to sort of live with that. More collaboration, more sort of long-term thinking is also important.
Ganesh, it's exciting talking to you. There's so much more to learn from each other, so much more to collaborate on. I can't wait to get on one of those two flights directly to Pittsburgh and walk around the Monongahela and KDKA radio station. I still remember those things. And that's why I talk to people listening out here. This is the beauty of working together in remote parts of the world. There's richness in every culture that we can bring together. There's diversity and the commonality of the human nature, as well as bringing us in equilibrium with nature. So thanks again, Ganesh, for reminding us of all these things. And to people out there, I would love to listen to you. I would love to hear your stories from different parts of the world in different arenas so we can co-create a meaningful world going forward. It's not just technology, but the techno-social fabric also needs to gel together so that we can live together. It's as exciting to talk to you as during the labs in the 1980s. What a joy.
Absolutely, Shankar. And you're hinting at global citizenship. We're both lucky to be global citizens and connected to many. So look forward to collaborating. And I'm jealous of your lifestyle in Carmel, California. I may have to come and visit you as well. But you're welcome in Pittsburgh. We'll let you conduct a workshop or provide your words of wisdom to folks here. So look forward to continuing our collaboration, Shankar. Thank you again for this opportunity.